That is pretty cozy, don't you think so? But can you describe it as a cozy game? Well, usually when people mention cozy games, they have something like Stardew Valley, Animal Crossing or Unpacking in mind. And I can understand why. These games have warm, nostalgic music, welcoming color palettes and simple, down-to-earth premises. Whether that means restoring an old family farm, building a new home on an island, or finding a new place for your things after moving into a new room. But it got us thinking, what actually makes a cozy game cozy? Does it have to be wholesome or cute? Does it matter if it's 3D or 2D? Or does coziness come from something else? And this question keeps coming up while we develop Dungeon Dominator, our game about managing an evil dungeon. After doing a bit of research, or should I say briefly looking through Steam store page, we realized that cozy doesn't always mean wholesome. Cult of the Lamp, Graveyard Keeper, Dredge, all of them are considered cozy despite the fact that they feature rotting corpses, grave robbing, cannibalism, public executions and eldritch rituals. So dark themes clearly do not stop a game from feeling cozy. But can the same work in a game where you build torture rooms, order monsters around and defend an evil dungeon? Can we make it feel cozy without making it less evil? This is what we are trying to figure out with our dungeon management game, Dungeon Dominator. But before we can answer it, we need to start with a more basic question. Is cozy even a genre? Well, we don't think so. You see, cozy games do not necessarily play alike. One might be a farming RPG, another might be an organizational puzzle, a third might be a fishing game built around cosmic horror. Their mechanics, goals and even their tone can be completely different. So maybe cozy is not really a genre in the traditional sense. Maybe it describes the relationship a player develops with a game. A game does not become cozy simply because it has farming, decorating or cute characters. It becomes cozy when its world starts to feel familiar. Its routines become comforting and the player feels safe enough to slow down. And if that is true, then almost any genre could potentially feel cozy. Even one about surviving on an island full of cannibals, or one about running an evil dungeon. But if genre doesn't decide whether the game is cozy, maybe the way it looks does. Well, we think a game can look cozy without actually feeling cozy. Pastel colors and cute characters do not help much if the player is constantly afraid of missing a deadline, losing progress or making an irreversible mistake. And the opposite is also true. A game can look gloomy, threatening or even disturbing while still giving the player a calm and familiar routine. Cozy aesthetics can create the right first impression, but they cannot sustain that feeling on their own. Take Overcooked, for example. It has colorful environments, cute cartoon chefs and an entire premise built around cooking with friends. By all accounts, it should be cozy, but it's not. It is the least cozy game I have ever played. Ultimately, coziness depends less on how a game looks and more on the pressure, freedom and control it gives the player. That is especially important for us because we decided to give Dungeon Dominator a darker and grittier visual style. Don't get me wrong, it's still cartoonish, just not to the same extent as many traditional cozy games. So we cannot rely on pastel colors or cute characters to make the player feel comfortable. If Dungeon Dominator is going to feel cozy, it has to earn that feeling through gameplay. And one of the first places to look is the routine the player repeats throughout the whole game. The usual: watering crops, fishing, arranging furniture or looking after cult followers. All of it can become comforting because the player knows what to expect and can see the results of their actions. But the repetition only works when it feels satisfying. If fishing, checking in on your neighbors or decorating your base become mandatory, or even worse, boring, the routine quickly turns into it a chore. Dungeon Dominator doesn't have the same daily routines as a farming or colony simulator. Its main loop is about digging, building rooms, summoning creatures, expanding the dungeon, and preparing for invasions. Since the players repeat these actions throughout the game, we want them to feel good every time. Because if they don't, we failed at the very core of game design. We focused on making every interaction feel satisfying. Building rooms comes with strong sounds, animations, and visual feedback, while grabbing, slapping, and throwing minions feels smooth, immediate, and playful. Creature needs are also mostly handled in the background. Build a kitchen, assign a butcher, and it starts producing meat for hungry minions. Build barracks, and they have somewhere to sleep, and also, despite the fact that they are monsters and demonic creatures, they still need to be paid, and their wages are taken from your treasury automatically. If you ignore those needs for too long, minions slowly lose loyalty and can eventually turn hostile and attack the ones who stay loyal. But this takes time, so the player has a chance to notice the problem and fix it before something bad happens. Our routines may look different from those in traditional cozy games, but the goal is the same: make the basic actions enjoyable enough that the players wants to keep doing them. But a comforting routine doesn't mean that nothing dangerous can ever happen. In fact, we think danger can actually make a safe place feel even more comforting. For example, in Stardew Valley, you leave the farm to explore monster-filled mines. In Dredge, the ocean becomes far more dangerous after dark, and in Cult of the Lamp, you regularly leave your settlement to fight rival cults. But eventually, you come back. The mines make farm feel safer, the dark ocean makes the port feel warmer, and returning to your cult feels like coming home. And in our game, invasions work in a similar way. They interrupt your routine, test the dungeon you have built, and make the quieter moments feel more rewarding. But the danger cannot be constant. If the player never gets time to recover, the game stops feeling cozy. Again, circling back to Overcooked, the game is constant chaos and stress. It's not bad, it's just why it can be a cozy game for me. But if you have a different take, you can always prove me wrong in the comments. And when the danger passes, what the player comes back to matters just as much. Many cozy games begin with a place that feels empty or neglected. In Stardew Valley, an overgrown farm slowly becomes a home. In Animal Crossing, an empty island grows into a community. And in Unpacking, bare rooms become personal spaces filled with memories. Little by little, the space begins to reflect your choices. The feeling of ownership is a big part of what makes it comforting. And that brings us back to Dungeon Dominator. As a team of indie developers, we wanted to combine two very different ideas: dark dungeon management and the comfort of slowly building something of your own. Our main inspiration is Dungeon Keeper. We absolutely adore its dark humor, setting, and dungeon management mechanics, and we want to breathe new life into that concept. In Dungeon Dominator, you begin with a little more than a dirt and a main room built around the giant heart. From there, you expand the dungeon and construct barracks, kitchens, forges, and even torture rooms. It may be dirty, damp, and covered in mold, but it's still your dungeon. And yeah, we have a room for every taste. But whether all of this feels playful or genuinely disturbing depends on how it is presented. Burying a body in a realistic horror game feels grim and, disturbing. In Graveyard Keeper, the same idea becomes part of an absurd daily routine. Dark humor, exaggeration, and cartoon violence create distance from the cruelty. The game can still be evil without making the player feel miserable. That is one of the things we love about Dungeon Keeper. Its world is cruel, but the cruelty is theatrical and often funny. We're aiming for a similar tone in Dungeon Dominator. You can hit enemies with a giant morning star or send them to a torture chamber, but the violence is presented in a satirical, cartoonish way rather than shown tone and graphic detail. The actions are evil, the tone is playful. Tone is only one part of making the dungeon feel like more than a collection of rooms and systems. The creatures living there are just as important. Players can become attached to characters even when those characters are not heroic, friendly, and especially pleasant. Sometimes a small detail is enough. That is important in Dungeon Dominator. We don't want our minions to feel like, NPCs. We want them to feel like actual inhabitants of the dungeon. Every minion already has a name, which helps them feel less NPC-ish. You cannot rename them yourself, though. If you think that we should add that feature, tell us in the comments, and we'll see what we can do about that. Of course, this creates a strange contradiction. You manage these creatures, order them around, and sometimes treat them rather badly, but you may still begin to care about them. And that attachment can make the dungeon feel more alive, more personal, more like a place of your own. Of course, all of these ideas still have to work together, and that is where the hardest part begins. Combining dark and cozy is easier said than done. If invasions happen too often, the player never gets time to relax. If managing creatures requires constant attention, it starts to feel like work. But if we make the dungeon too safe and forgiving, it may stop feeling evil. So, can an evil dungeon feel cozy without becoming less evil? Well, we think it can. Cozy doesn't have to mean wholesome. Even a dirty, dangerous dungeon can feel cozy when its basic actions are satisfying and it starts to feel like your own. That is what we're trying to achieve with Dungeon Dominator. If you want to see whether we can make it work, you can add the game to your Steam wishlist. And if you have any ideas about how we could improve our game, share it in the comments. And thank you for your time.